Ed and Lorraine Warren. I, like many of you, have been aware of their existence for a very long time. I, for decades, becoming interested in paranormal research back in the late 60s, early 1970s. I was aware of the Warrens from about 1973 on, and their popularity and notoriety has expanded exponentially since then, with a heyday in the 80s into the 90s. Um, the Warrens took a religious approach to the paranormal. Their activities were full of demons, possession, dark forces, and many people. Let me preface this by saying many people love the Warrens. They support them, think everything the Warrens did was on the up and up, and everything the Warrens said is the God honest truth. The other half of the population thinks they were con men and frauds and never did anything truthful. Uh, I noticed early on that a large amount of the criticism of the Warrens was not based on any factual analysis of their cases, their work, their evidence. It was just a knee jerk reaction that, well, the Warrens believe in God, believe in demons, believe in dark forces, and therefore it's all nonsense. Well, my initial background in the paranormal has been in parapsychology as a layman. I am not a parapsychologist. And eventually I operated as sort of a citizen scientist in the field of parapsychology. Uh, I have noticed in many decades of researching this subject that there are certain cases which, and they're outlier cases, that do seem to have some darker or negative aspects to them, which can be interpreted in different ways. It can be poltergeist activity, it can be an angry ghost. The Warrens believed it was demonic activity, and I was not going to, denounce them just because of that belief. My approach was to research them, research their cases, and see, what's actually going on with them. But I was very sympathetic to the Warrens early on, mainly because of what I read about them in books that they wrote, quote unquote, detailing their cases and their background. And these books were, a couple of them were pretty persuasive, pretty well written. The Warrens put across what seemed to be some impressive theological arguments and discussions about these things. Uh, over time, over years, I've learned that the Warrens did not write these books, probably not any of them. These books were written by professional authors and, in fact, professional horror novelists, which is why the books were so effective and so well written. But we'll get more into that later. So I have followed the Warrens out of legitimate and non-judgmental interest in the field and their approach to it. The interest has come and gone. I've researched things. I've read their work. I've talked to people who've known them and worked with them. The interest has waned over the years. It's not been a constant fascination with them. But let us begin. One half of the dynamic duo, Edward Miney. Edward Miney, not Edward Warren. Ed Warren was a stage name that he adopted when he got involved in paranormal research. Warren was his middle name, Edward Warren Miney. Why he felt the need to adopt a stage name, I do not know. Some of us may have some thoughts about that. Born September 1926, when he's 5 years old, his family moved into a haunted house in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where immediately he claims he experienced a ghostly haunting phenomena. The ghost of an angry old man would torment him and his family while he was there. And then later on, his grandfather died, and his grandfather would haunt the house. So that's where Ed's interest in ghosts and the paranormal began, from his supposed personal experiences. Ed was raised in a Catholic family, and Ed has always claimed that he was a pious, devout, conservative Catholic. And we'll explore that more in depth a little later. He is working as a movie theater usher in Connecticut. Then he joined the U.S. Navy, and he served in a combat role on a ship in World War II. He was a with a Navy gunnery detachment on a merchant marine ship. His ship came under fire. The ship was sunk. Ed was in the water, severely injured, and was rescued. So Ed Warren is a was a combat wounded veteran. He also took some art classes. And there are a number of Ed Warren original paintings out there. They occasionally pop up on eBay. You can Google that yourselves, take a look at them, and make your own determination about how much of an artist Ed was. Lorraine Warren, Lorraine Rita Moran, born in 1927 in Bridgeport, Connecticut. When she was 9 years old, she claims she started developing psychic abilities. First, she was able to see auras around everybody in school, everybody she interacted with. She was going to a Catholic school, and when she mentioned that to the staff and the nuns, she learned very quickly that no, she could not talk about that anymore. She also began developing clairvoyant abilities, and all of this is based on what they have said. I am not attesting to any of this. Lorraine claims that throughout her life, she worked regularly with law enforcement, solving criminal cases, cold cases, murder cases. Just for the record, I've been in law enforcement my entire life. I know cops in Connecticut. I've never been able to verify that Lorraine Warren was utilized by any law enforcement agency in the United States. Can't prove that she wasn't, but I've looked for it and I've not been able to find it. She claimed that she was tested at UCLA's Parapsychology lab in the 1970s by Dr. Thelma Moss, the lab leader, and that she was certified as a psychic. She was verified as what she calls a light trance medium, and that she tested very high on the subject, on the test stuff. I've discussed this with Dr. Barry Taft. Barry was the lead research associate for Thelma Moss at the UCL lab and was there the entire time of the existence of the lab. Barry quite vehemently indicates that no, Lorraine Warren was never there. Lorraine Warren was never tested. And the UCLA lab and Dr. Moss did not certify, verify, or accredit any psychics or psychic claimants. Ed and Lorraine met when they were 16 years old. Lorraine attended his movie theater where he's an usher. Lorraine reported that the first time she saw Ed at the theater, she had a clairvoyant vision of the future, which I think most of us would call precognition. And she saw that they were going to have a life together and have a family and have a child. And the baby in the picture is their daughter, Judy. They married in 1945. Ed was still in the Navy, but was on leave, came back to Bridgeport, Connecticut. They got married. After Ed left the service, Ed and Lorraine, utilizing Ed's artistic skills for what they were, would drive around New England in Ed's 1933 car and set up roadside stands where he would sell his paintings, and did that for a while, apparently made some money at it. They were both interested in ghosts, Ed because of his experiences in his house, and Lorraine apparently was seeing things clairvoyantly by then. So when they would find out that there was a haunted house in a location or a town that they were visiting to try to sell the artwork, Ed would sit outside the house and paint a picture of the house, then go knock on the door and say, "Hey, I'm Ed. I painted this picture of your house. Here, you can have it as a gift. And by the way, I heard that your house is haunted. I'd like to talk to you about it." So that's how Ed first got access to supposedly haunted houses and made the approach to get inside to do an investigation. Actually, that's a pretty good approach. It seemed to work for them. Around 1950, Ed and Lorraine decided to formalize their ghost investigation approach by creating an organization called NESPER, the New England Society for Psychic Research. They had other investigators working for them by this time. They taught classes, gave lectures, all based out of NESPER, which is primarily based out of their home in Monroe, Connecticut. NESPER was described by them as a association of academics, trained paranormal researchers, clergy, scientists who were dedicated to helping people with negative paranormal experiences. At some point in the development of Ed and Lorraine's activities and NESPER, the focus shifted noticeably from ghosts and haunted houses to demonic infestation and possession. And that shift happened around 1973. And I think there's a reason why that shift happened around 1973, and we will get to that. NESPER published what they described as an acclaimed journal of the field. Now, I subscribe to the Journal of Parapsychology, the Journal SPR. I get the Journal of ASSAP. Used to get Journal ASPR. So I have my own personal mental image of what a professional journal of psychical research looks like. We'll discuss in a few minutes about whether the NESPER journal was in that league. Ed and Lorraine thought it was. NESPER, which is Ed and Lorraine and their team of investigators, have claimed to have investigated between 3,000 and 10,000 cases. It depends on where they were talking and when they were talking, what the exact number was. Another researcher has broken those numbers down and figured out that for Ed and Lorraine to have done even 3,000 cases, they would have had to have worked the case every day for about 40 years. So they claim to be involved in at least 700 religious exorcisms. Now, Ed was not an exorcist. He never claimed to be. But he claimed to regularly assist in an official capacity with sanctioned church exorcisms, primarily by the Catholic Church. The Warrens developed certain ideas and concepts about how this stuff works and what's going on in the world of the paranormal. And they developed their own dictionary and terms and approaches, which are not exactly those recognized by the rest of the paranormal community, at least the learned paranormal community, like ASSAP, SPR, the Rhine Institute. The Warrens defined, and they call this philosophy Warrenology, a wonderful term. A ghost, specifically a disembodied human spirit that is not recognized by anybody. An apparition, they called a spirit that is specifically recognized as a known deceased individual. Parapsychology and mainstream paranormal research also use the term ghost and apparition, but the definitions are a little bit different. They defined a transition apparition as a ghost that would reach out to a loved one to announce the moment of their death. In parapsychology, we call that a crisis apparition. Ed called a crisis apparition, however, a ghost that comes back to offer guidance to the family, to share in family celebrations and birthday parties, welcome a new baby to the family. Again, he used some of the same terms that we in psychical research use. He has had his own definitions. Ed specifically defined a poltergeist as either an angry human spirit with an attitude or a demon. Ed did not take kindly to the recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis idea. It was poltergeist were spirits, sometimes human, most often demonic. And Ed did not believe in sleep paralysis as a neurophysiological medical condition. Ed insisted that reports of sleep paralysis were demonic oppression. Ed Warren and everybody who worked with him referred to him as a demonologist. Ed, in multiple outlets, and all of this I'm taking from his writings and interviews he's given to a journalist and my discussions with him. Ed claimed that there were 7 recognized demonologists recognized by the church, however you want to define that term, in North America. 6 of them were clergy, and only one of them, him, was a non-clerical lay demonologist, but fully certified and fully recognized. Ed has been questioned many times about this because I've talked to various people, including in the clergy, and they don't have a position or title called demonologists. They do have, the Roman Catholic Church does have authorized and trained exorcists who do study demonology as part of their training process, but there is nothing called a demonologist, which Ed claimed to be. When Ed's been questioned about this in interviews, he has stated, well, I never became a demonologist. I was born a demonologist. And to further quote him, and this is the source is a book called Ghost Tracks from 2004, where he was interviewed, and quote from Ed Warren, I feel I was born with a certain awareness and placed in a position to gather more knowledge in that area. It always seemed to come to me, maybe in the form of an insight. I became a respected expert in the field without degrees in theology or psychology or courses in parapsychology. And after 25 to 30 years of psychic research, many different clergy and leaders in all kinds of religions discovered that I somehow understood and knew more about the preternatural than even their learned scholars, unquote. All righty then. That seems a far cry from being a recognized and authorized official demonologist for anybody, but who knows? Now, with Ed's theology, Ed claimed to be a pious, conservative Christian, a Catholic Christian. Most of his work involving fighting demons and helping with exorcisms followed Roman Catholic ritual, used Roman Catholic accoutrements. And Ed clearly favored using that approach because he was raised in Roman Catholicism. But he has also said many times that you don't have to be a Christian or a Catholic or use their rituals to battle demons. Quoting him, any religion which follows the love of our, teaches the love of our fellow man, works for battling demons. And he has said he would not hesitate to work with rabbis, imams, Wiccans, or tribal witch doctors to effect an exorcism. And he has worked with rabbis, I believe, Wiccans. I do not believe he ever encountered a witch doctor. Okay, that's a philosophy, but that perspective is looked at with squinted eyes by many others in the various religious communities, especially Roman Catholics.
Yeah, I'd say the same.
Contradictions. Sometimes Ed would suggest that any religious or ritualistic approach would work in battling and getting rid of demons and demonic infestation. Other times he said, nah, the power of Christian theology, the belief and power of Christ was the key. He regarded crucifixes and holy water as having great power against demons, which is, I don't really quite understand why that works specifically, but anybody, a witch doctor could, shake bones, and that would also get rid of the demons, apparently. So Ed went back and forth on that. Interestingly, his concept that any approach would work, because you have good and pure intent to make the demons leave, actually does have some connection with current parapsychological concepts, where we believe that psychokinesis, the ability to remotely affect physical objects, occurs because of intent. You want it to happen, usually subconsciously, in a poltergeist case, and stuff happens. So Ed's idea, without him knowing it, because Ed did not believe in RSPK, but Ed actually may have been on to something with his concept that any ritual, any belief will work. It might work from a parapsychological standpoint. It does not make sense from a theological standpoint. Ed and his team were Catholic-ish. While Warren claimed to be a trusted asset of the Catholic Church and worked with priests and Catholics many times, while he did occasionally work with the mainstream Roman Catholic Church, usually on an individual level. He would talk with a local parish priest visit a diocese and sometimes convince the folks there that, yeah, there may be some activity at a certain house that the church maybe should go look into. But most of Ed's official church connections were with breakaway sects and clerics who are not recognized by the Vatican. There is an offshoot of the Catholic Church. So these were groups and individual churches and parishes who did not agree with the Vatican II reforms, including Mass no longer had to be said in Latin and a variety of other changes. Several priests did not agree with that, so they broke away from the Catholic Church and created their own non-recognized, non-sanctioned churches. That's primarily who the Warrens worked with when they said they were working with the Catholics. Here we have a picture of Bishop Robert McKenna, originally Reverend McKenna, later Bishop McKenna, who had one of these churches in Monroe, Connecticut. And Bishop McKenna worked with Ed Warren on many, many cases. And there are other clergy from similar backgrounds. Why do demons come into your life and torment you? Well, Ed had a few ideas. The primary one is worshiping Satan, dabbling in the occult, or playing with black magic rituals. Personally, I've never met anybody who does black magic, but Ed has encountered many people who do, including, he claims, black magicians and wizards. Also, the use of Ouija boards attracts these into your life. And if you read the Warrens' books and case reports and interviews, it looks like a huge percentage of their cases, which involve demonic activity, were precipitated by people using a Ouija board. Now, if you ask the Warrens what a demon is, their answer was the classical Christian theological version: horns, hooves, grunting pig sounds. And they are very susceptible to Christian rituals to banish them, but any old ritual will do in a pinch. Ed was big on the idea that demons manifest using variations of the number 3. And that's how you know if you have a haunting or something going on in your house. If things happen in 3s, that's a sure sign it's actually a demon. If you have knocks on your door and there's no one there and it's 3 knocks, if you hear some poundings or footsteps and it's in series of 3s, if things happen at 3 a.m., if you wake up at 3, that is a sign of a demonic activity. Ed felt that was because the demons are specifically mocking the concept of the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Okay, maybe so, but if the demons feel a need to mock the Christian Holy Trinity, why were they also afraid of Muslim clerics, imams, and tribal witch doctors, who I don't think would give any credence to the Holy Trinity at all? When I first started reading this, and other writers and researchers picked up on this, and if you Google, 3 a.m. Demons, you'll find a lot of stuff on the web. I took a project many, many years ago where I said, let's go through the literature of the field and see if I find things indicating that 3s happen, more often than other numbers. 3 a.m. activity in 3s. And I did find in many books, including books that were well researched and documented, that people did experience and report things at 3 a.m. And I would underline that in pencil in the books, go, hey, here we go. The Warrens might have been onto something. But that might have been a little bit of confirmation bias on my part, because eventually I realized, 3 a.m. shows up a lot. 3 knocks shows up a lot. And I would notice that because I was looking for it. But no more so than things happening at midnight, 4 p.m., 2 a.m., or poundings on your wall, that happen in series of 9. So I never found any real variation or verification of that as a thing. Others, may have different experiences. Ed and Lorraine specifically believe that inanimate objects could be cursed by black magic practitioners, and that these objects, very often dolls, could either be imbued with demonic power externally, or could actually be occupied by a demon. Ed has written that the Egyptian tomb curses, where you dig up the tomb of Tutankhamun and people died, and that story has been very thoroughly investigated and debunked. Ed thoroughly believed it and lectured on it. And let's continue. Now, demons, 1973, in a book called Deliver Us from Evil, by a guy, I believe name was Sawyer, interviewed what the book was all about, Ed and Lorraine. And Sawyer quoted Ed as saying that anyone interested in demons and demonic possession needs to study parapsychology, which is the science that investigates this, and specifically said, if you want to learn all about this, go to Duke University and learn about it. That was 1973. Shortly after that, Ed never mentioned going to Duke University or studying parapsychology to learn about demons again, because I think Ed at some point was briefed on what parapsychology actually is and does, which is not demons. And by 1973, Duke University parapsychology lab was no longer even operating. They'd moved off campus as the FRNM. And as time went on, Ed did not like parapsychologists. Many statements and interviews, he would basically denounce parapsychologists for using the scientific approach and refusing to recognize his theological truth. Now, Ed and Lorraine did believe in ghosts, not just demons. But what a ghost was, and a ghost was a surviving human spirit or consciousness, but how a ghost became a ghost depended on which interview they were giving, which book they were having ghost written for them, and what mood they were in. Sometimes ghosts were described by them as human souls stuck in purgatory by God. So still for a theological connotation. And these ghosts were allowed by God to interact with the living world for whatever reason. But sometimes ghosts are human spirits that have unfinished business that they choose to linger behind until that issue is resolved, which is one of the classic concepts of what a ghost is. Or ghosts are human spirits that don't know they're dead and are confused and linger around. Again, another classic concept. I would suspect it needs to be one or the other, but I do not know. Ghost behavior, according to Warrenology, ghosts are invisible. How they become visible and physically manifest into our environment is by drawing AC electrical energy from the environment. Your TV, your refrigerator, your wall outlets, any source of electricity, they would draw that and generate some sort of ionizing field, which would become visible. That ionizing field will sometimes attract dust particles or vapor particles to create a visible substance that could reflect the light and you could see it. Ed specifically mentioned that high tension power lines and transformers, that ghosts would often materialize around those because those are great energy sources. And if they could not find an artificial energy source, a ghost could draw off the human body's bioelectric field to manifest. And he knew that was going to happen if he felt cold in a place, he felt a cold spot. The Warrens believed that ghosts would often hang around the gravestones and the funeral homes where their bodies were processed. That's interesting. That also goes against the observations by legitimate ghost investigators and parapsychologists who do investigate ghosts, the few that do. And the literature of the field, of the history of what places are haunted, going back, to the 1700s when these things were first documented. No, graveyards and funeral homes do not have reputations for being haunted. Homes are haunted, schools are haunted, places where people lived and had experiences and experienced emotional events, not the place where your body is buried or where your body was embalmed. Ed would beg to disagree with me. Poltergeists, as I mentioned, are not RSPK. They are angry, hostile spirits, but often demons masquerading as human spirits. Ed believed that if ghosts were around, i.e. dead people, Their presence could attract demons, and demons could utilize these ghosts to help do their bidding and to help frighten people. Uh, they believe that if you did have a ghost in your house, there was likely a demon hanging out in the background. And one of the tropes that you will find in many, many Warren investigations and books that have been written about, the Warrens go in, they do have ghosts, but then Lorraine pulls the homeowner aside, but honey, now sit down, this is going to be frightening. You also have one dark entity which never walked in human form. Again, that's one of their standard encounters. So if you got ghosts, good chance you have demons. Now, the Warrens believe that demons in particular haunt or hang out at graveyards and funeral homes because demons celebrate any location where you have a death, the destruction of the human body, because it helps them celebrate their hatred for humankind and God. Now let's get into a few cases. I'm not going to go in depth into the stories behind the cases. You can read the books, watch the movies, or just Google the subject. But Annabelle was a Raggedy Ann doll, which the story goes was given as a gift to a young female nurse who was living with other nurse roommates in the house, and they treated the doll as a real person. They would talk to the doll, give it a seat at the kitchen table for lunch. That attention to this doll attracted a demon. The demon then manipulated the doll, did not inhabit it. The doll was not possessed, but the demon manipulated the doll, made it walk around, made it move, made it levitate, made it port into different locations, follow the nurses around, and completely terrorize them. The story has changed over the years, though. In later years, Annabelle, they described Annabelle as actually being inhabited by a demon, which resulted in them having to secure that doll, bring it back home, put it in a glass and wood display case that was sealed by arcane mystical rituals by some sort of priest. And they had to regularly have that ritual and seal binding ritual renewed to make sure that the demon could not get out of the doll and terrorize humanity. The Warrens regarded Annabelle as the most dangerous, most evil, most demonically infested item in their collection of objects that they recovered from haunting and demon cases. If it ever got out of the case, there would be hell to pay. Don't even get close to the case. Do not touch the case. The evil is incomprehensible. Unless you're Lorraine Warren and you need to carry the doll from one room to the other. And unless you're Zach Bagans, in which case you can do a TV special where NESPER brings the doll to Las Vegas on an airplane, sitting in a first class seat next to the current director of NESPER, Tony Spera, brought to Zach's museum, sat on a chair, no case, no binding ritual surrounding it, and no problem whatsoever. Zach actually touched and handled Annabelle after being warned, don't do it. And Zach allegedly and on TV became possessed. I have no further comment on that. Oh, Annabelle escaped. Did you know that? I knew that. The social media and the internet was abuzz with rumors on multiple people's social media sites and websites that Annabelle had escaped from her cage in Monroe, Connecticut, and was out bringing about the fall of humankind. The buzz was so strong that Tony Spera, who was the Warrens' son-in-law, he actually had to do a video on YouTube and make an official announcement that no, Annabelle did not escape. Annabelle is secure. There's nothing to fear. It's an interesting YouTube video. You can search for it on YouTube and see it for yourself. Annabelle was not the only demonic doll that the Warrens have. One case that was written about, and this is one of their lesser known encounters, a Navy commander and his wife visited the Warrens at their home in Monroe, Connecticut. There were two specific demonic dolls that the wife was fascinated by, and she wanted to handle them. Ed warned her, no way, don't do it. It's horribly dangerous. You could wind up dying or becoming possessed. Well, the wife touched one of the dolls anyway. Ed admonished her, but the world did not end immediately. The couple went home, driving home. While they're driving home, Ed heard a horrendous commotion in his artifact room, also known as the Warrens Occult Museum, in their basement. Hearing the noise, Ed ran down to the basement, found all of his artifact collections all knocked off the shelves, all of his items piled up in a pile in the middle of the floor, except for the two dolls, which were still in their original position, staring at Ed mockingly. Now, I think it's worth quoting the statement that the Navy commander allegedly gave to Ed Warren. I quote, the family, well, I'm not quoting yet, but the commander and his wife were driving home, and they were run off the road by an invisible phantom car that the headlights blinded the driver, the commander. He went off the road, had a pretty serious accident. I don't think they were actually really hurt. According to Ed, the commander called him up later and told him, I quote, I looked up into the rearview mirror and saw the blinding headlights and noticed they formed sort of a halo. And God, I swear that in the center of that halo were those two dolls staring at me, laughing. No further comment. Amityville, we've all heard of this case. I'm not going to go into details behind it. Most of us are familiar with the Amityville story. Ed and Lorraine claim that they were the lead investigators of the Amityville case. Well, maybe. Depends on how you define an investigation. They had no interaction with the Lutz family while the events were going on. We're not there when the events were going on. Channel 5, WNEW in New York, wanted to do a special on the Amityville house. So they did a on-site filming for 3 days, utilizing Ed and Lorraine to look at it from the occult perspective. They brought in some scientists from different psychical research institutions to look at it from the parapsychological standpoint. And Lorraine's role was to do a seance to see if she can contact whatever forces were in the house. This was after the Lutzes fled. The Lutzes were out of the house. They did leave all their belongings in the house. That's documented by photographs taken during this Channel 5 investigation. But the events were over with. So this was an after the fact investigation. Now, what happened there, and the Warrens' opinions about the Amityville horror case have changed over the years. But they've always described it as either one of their most horrifying case. Lorraine did her seance, no results. Nothing happened during the seance. I suspect nothing happened because it was being filmed live by Channel 5. Lorraine then later walked around, went upstairs specifically to where the bedrooms were. And as she was going upstairs, she had a clairvoyant vision where she reported she sensed the presence of unspeakable demonic evil. Ed went off on his own without the cameras following him, went down to the basement, came back up, claimed he was knocked down to the ground by an unseen force and held pinned to the ground. He feared for his life and eventually was able to free himself. As Lorraine said, and I quote, I hope this is as close to hell as I ever get. Also, during this Channel 5 investigation, Channel 5 brought in some serious researchers. Dr. Alex Tanis from the ASPR, American Society for Psychical Research. Dr. Ode Carlososis from ASPR was there, and Dr. Jerry Solfin from the Psychical Research Foundation in North Carolina. Now, I don't know, this was in 1976, this thing happened. The case 1974 into 75, this investigation in 1976. I don't know, I suspect not, that Tanis or Solfin had their PhDs by then. Carlos Osis certainly did. But these were credentialed, serious academic scientists. Ed claimed to be the investigative team leader working with these guys. Well, I wasn't there. I have difficulty accepting that Ed Warren was the lead investigator with a team that included Tanis, Osis, and Sullivan. But who knows? Now, the scientists, while they were there, all they found was a book, was a contract stuffed away in a corner, left behind by the Lutzes, which seemed to indicate that before the Lutzes fled the house, before all this stuff happened, that there was a contract for a book and a movie deal about a haunted house. I believe it was Dr. Alex Tanis who found this, went to Osis and Solf and said, hey, this is a scam. We're being set up to help publicize something for a book or a movie. They left. So all they found was that evidence. Ed and Lorraine, however, found demons a-popping everywhere. They found a demon manifesting itself as Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s head on the end of a moose antler. Ronald DeFeo Jr. was the family member who shot and murdered his entire family in that house. Now, if you can see up on the far right of the moose antlers, it looks like a head, a roughly head-shaped object with hair and a beard. Ed Warren claimed that was that was not Ronnie DeFeo, because Ronnie DeFeo was alive and in jail, but a demon impersonating Ronnie DeFeo. He made that assumption because this seems to have a beard, and Ronald DeFeo had a beard. See the guy standing next to the moose head? That's Paul Bartz. That's one of the Warrens' NESPER investigators. Remember that name, Paul Bartz. Try to remember that face, and definitely remember that shirt he's wearing. Let's go back to the moose. Here's a close-up of the antler with the demonic Ronnie DeFeo head sticking on it, which Ed was so impressed by because it had hair and a beard. Well, the Amityville case happened in 1974, 1975. This was filmed as abandoned by the Lutzes in 1976. So we assume that demon head was there maybe in 1974, 75. Well, back then, I was alive. I was a kid. Guess what? I had realistic, lifelike hair and beards on a little head also. Amazing talking G.I. Joe. The head popped right off. I created lots of havoc with my G.I. Joes, popping the heads off and sticking them around places. Demonic Ronald DeFeo head, or one of the children who lived in the house in 1974 when this product was on the market. Could it have been that one of the kids stuck their G.I. Joe head on the end of the antler? Ed Warren says no, it was a demon. One of the Warrens' claims of incredible irrefutable evidence from the Amityville case was a photograph taken during their Channel 5 investigation. They had a camera set up on the stairs, which automatically, I think like every 5 or 10 seconds, I'm not sure of the time-lapse duration, but it was an infrared camera, and it took automatic photographs at a certain interval. One of the photographs that they examined after the fact, after the investigation, shows a figure and a face peering out of what was one of the murdered little boy's bedrooms. The Ed Warren said this is a demon impersonating one of the Lutz children, and I'm not going to identify the name of the child, but this was a demon, and you know it's a demon because of the glowing eyes. Ed claimed that when a demon manifested itself, it could take on the appearance of a human to try to fool us, but they could never do it perfectly. There was always a defect in the manifestation, and it was often the eyes. Now, let me tell you, looking at it just by itself and knowing where the photo was taken, This is a spooky photograph. You have what looks like a child sticking, standing there looking over the banister in a child's bedroom with what looks like glowing eyes. All right. I want you to pay attention to this. Other researchers have done photo computer analysis on this photograph, and there are better versions out there. This is a very low resolution photo I found on the web. So it's not as clear as some of the others that I've actually seen. And the others, this takes on another perspective. Is this a child who is standing up with his head barely reaching over the banister? Or is this an adult male crouching down on his knees, poking his head out of the room? This is an infrared photograph. Infrared light reflecting off human eyeballs can give this impression of glowing eyes. If you're wearing eyeglasses by any chance, that view of glowing eyes is even more enhanced. I want you to notice, and again, I wish I had a better picture version of this photograph. Looking behind the slats of the stairs there, you see what is the upper torso of a person, and you see different horizontal and vertical lines indicating a specific pattern of a plaid shirt. Remember our friend Paul Bartz, who was there. One of his jobs was to monitor the cameras, to set the infrared cameras up. And that evening, he was up in that bedroom, wiring up surveillance cameras. Could it have been that Paul Bartz was on his hands and knees, hooking up equipment and cameras in that room, peered out because he heard something or somebody might have called his name, peers out, is captured at that moment by an infrared camera. I do not know if Paul Bartz wore eyeglasses or not. I've not seen any photographs of him wearing eyeglasses. But side-by-side analysis has been done of Paul Bart's plaid shirt that he was wearing there that night and the pattern of the shirt behind that stair. They are identical. But Ed said, nope, that was a demon. There's Paul Bartz, Lorraine, and that might be Jerry Sulfan. I'm not sure. They're heading up the stairs to set up some equipment. Stephen Kaplan. Stephen Kaplan was a gentleman, a little bit controversial. He claimed to be a doctor, had a doctorate. The doctorate was one of those diploma mill ones. And yep, there's some controversy with that, but it had no impact or bearing whatsoever on the research he did in his book, The Amityville Horror Conspiracy, where Kaplan researched the claims, not the claims of the Warrens, but the claims of, I'm not even going to say the claims of the Lutzes. The Amityville Horror Story was written by Jay Anson, who was a horror novelist contracted by Prentice Hall to work from tapes recorded by George Lutz and write a book about it. Even the Warrens initially said they believed everything George and Kathy said. That was the absolute truth, that everything in the book, The Amityville Horror, was the absolute truth. As information came out over the decades, including Stephen Kaplan's expose in the Amityville Horror Conspiracy book, where the Warrens could no longer say it's all absolutely true. The Warrens then said, oh, well, we can't attest for that. We only know what happened because of reading Jay Anson's book and briefly talking to the Lutzes at a restaurant. The Lutzes were in town the day of the Channel 5 investigation, but refused to come back to the house. So Ed and Lorraine did meet them apparently at a local diner or restaurant to get the keys to the house, I think. And Stephen Kaplan went hog wild on this. And if there are 10 claims in Anson's book, Kaplan tore each claim. There are many more than 10 claims. So Kaplan tore it apart. Kaplan would appear on TV talk shows, the Bill Boggs show on Channel 5 back then, which I watched when it happened on Channel 5, with Kaplan and the Warrens, and they would go off on each other. A couple of times, Ed almost got out of his chair. It looked like he was going to try to punch out Stephen Kaplan. They hated each other. In one of my one conversation with Ed Warren, Steve Kaplan came up. Steve Kaplan is no longer with us. He died of a heart attack a while back. When I mentioned Steve Kaplan, and I will always remember this. Ed Warren, pious, devout, conservative Catholic, doing God's work to help rid the world of evil, told me, and I have this on tape, if anybody ever questions that he said this, I hope that bastard is rotting in hell. Unquote from Ed Warren. Nothing more on that matter. The Smurl haunting. Briefly, West Pittston, Pennsylvania. This is a house, the typical poltergeist activity, which became demonic, including a succubus, a demon which would attack and physically rape Mr. Smurl, shown in this photograph with his wife in front of the house. It was the subject of a book called The Haunted and a TV movie in the US called The Haunted, starring, I think, Sally Kirkman as Mrs. Smurl. Ed got called in. Ed, yep, we got demons here. Ed went to the Scranton Diocese of the real Roman Catholic Church and said, hey, we got demons here. We need the church's help. Well, the Scranton Diocese did not have anybody knowledgeable about demonic activity, did not have an exorcist. So they arranged for Father Alphonsus Trebold to come from New York. Father Trebold is a professor of theology at St. Bonaventure in New York and was an official exorcist for the Roman Catholic Church. He agreed to come. He came, checked it out. He reported that he felt, the family seems sincere. At least they're really frightened. It's real fear. They're very upset. But he found no evidence at all of any demonic infestation. And this is a guy who is not skeptical of the existence of evil and demons. He was an exorcist, but he thought not going on here. He later did an interview with a reporter named Jill Stefko. Jill was asking him about his experiences with the Warrens at this case and other cases. And he said, quote, the Warrens, they were not sincere. They were not what they purported to be, unquote. Quoting Stefko in her article, she said, Trebold, quote, this is quoting Stefko, the reporter, Trebold chuckled when explaining that when he went to one of their lectures, they saw him there, and then they toned down their act. So he wore disguises when he went to their future talks, because, unquote, because when the Warrens would talk about this haunting, apparently they were exaggerating a bit, and then they saw Father Trebold there, who was there and knows what really happened. They had to modify what they were saying. In a later media interview, which I have a copy of, talking about the Warrens, he said, quote, Father Trebold, I often go against the Warrens because they find so-called evidence of the presence of demonic spirits so often and so quickly. Now remember, this is from an exorcist. Lots of people showed up at the Smurl haunting, hang outside the house because there were crowds, there was news coverage. Here was an interesting visitor to the Smurl poltergeist event while all this was going on. I don't know how many folks recognize this. Jason Miller, Father Karras from The Exorcist, came out to watch what everybody was told was a real case of demonic infestation and obsession. I would have loved to have been able to talk to Jason Miller about his experiences there and his opinions. Jason has passed away a while back. What was the Warrens' most horrifying case? And there is one specific case, well, more than one case. Sometimes they say it's Amityville. Other times it's another case. This is the other case. Quoting Ed Warren, the most horrifying case, that is something I never ever talk about. The case was almost the end of us, that's for sure. We found ourselves taken to a place out of this world that you'd never believe existed, even if I were to describe it. Every minute, Every second of those long hours was so unbelievable, so incomprehensibly horrible, that I believe I know now, or I now know, the true meaning of hell and the value of life on earth. Most horrifying demonic portal to hell on the face of the planet, according to Ed Warren, Enfield. Most of the folks with ASSAP are familiar with Enfield. A great deal of controversy about the Warrens' involvement with the Enfield case. Some people claim they were never there. This is all lies. Guy Playfair has said he thought the Warrens were there for one day and then left. The Warrens were there. They were there for more than one day. They were there for 4 days. I've seen photographic and video evidence showing that the Warrens were in the house, did interview and talk with the kids and the mother. This was 1979, August. The Warrens and a couple of their co-investigators were on a tour, a tourist tour of Scotland and England. While over there, Ed saw the news reports on TV about or on the newspaper about the Enfield haunting. He felt this is something we need to get in on. So Ed and Lorraine visited the house, knocked on the door cold. Peggy opened the door, let them in. Ed apparently charmed her because she let Ed hang out, and Ed spent the night, the first night he arrived. I don't know if Lorraine spent the night there or not, but because everything I found indicates Ed spent the night in the house. The other folks who were there with them were John Kennyhertz and our old friend Paul Bartz, the demonic child with the glowing eyes. They arrived at 6 p.m. the first night. The next morning, Ed started hearing Fred. Fred was this gruff voice that most of us know emanated physically from Janet through a false larynx process, but it was her voice, it was her talking. Whether or not Janet was being influenced or was under some degree of possession, that's arguable, who knows, but the voice was Janet's. Everyone acknowledges that, except Ed Warren. Ed was there on scene for 4 days. According to both Ed and John Kennyhertz, the voices were not emanating from Janet. They were emanating from empty space, coming from walls and coming from open empty space. Even when the kids were not present, so they were not coming from Janet. Certainly, I think Guy Playfair and Morris Gross had other different experiences. There were 2 or 3, sometimes up to 6 separate voices talking independently, sometimes concurrently. Several voices at the same time talking and having conversations with each other, having discussions about what the investigators were doing around them. On the first day, the conversations occurred apparently 24 hours nonstop. Ed saw other things. He saw boxes of toys vibrating on a steel storage shelf, and the boxes levitating and then falling off the shelves. Foul demonic odors permeated the house. And Ed said a large pile of apparently human excrement apported, materialized in the middle of the living room floor. Okay. To get the kids out of the house as part of what Ed said was a scientific experiment to see if the kids had anything to do with the voices and the activity. Well, Bartz took the kids to a restaurant while Ed and John stayed at the house. Ed had brought a bottle of holy water with him in his car, and he was going to do a religious clearing ceremony to try to get rid of the demons. When Ed went out to the car, the bottle of holy water had mysteriously disappeared. So Ed, in a pinch, decided, okay, I'll get tap water, put it in another bottle, pour some table salt in it, shake it, and I will bless it. And it's do-it-yourself holy water. So Ed did that, started sprinkling the holy water around, but the lead demon, Fred, called him on it and pointed out accurately, impressively, that what the hell is this? This isn't going to work. You're not a priest. How can you bless holy water? So that didn't work. And kudos to the demon for noting that. While Ed was there, on several occasions, he claimed he saw huge sheets of wallpaper ripping off the walls and floating, levitating around the house. One time, Fred ordered him, turn the lights out. I want the lights out. I want it dark. Ed refused. So when Ed refused, a huge sheet of wallpaper tore off the wall, floated to the ceiling, and covered the ceiling light, plunging the room into darkness. Again, remember, all of this is what Ed said happened. Ed said a wooden chair levitated, floated in front of him, and exploded into shards. Ed claimed, and the source for this is the book, The Demonologist. Ed said he filmed, quote, levitations, teleportations, and dematerializations of people and objects, unquote. Well, that's pretty darned impressive. Film of that could be considerable evidence to the reality of these things. Many of us on this lecture are involved in parapsychology and psychical research. I suspect most of you, like I, have never seen this evidence. This film has never been subjected to analysis by other researchers or gone through any kind of peer review. But Ed claimed to have this evidence. According to Warren, there were 7 specific demons, individual demons infesting the house. Fred was the ringleader. The reason they were in the house is because the Hodgson children were playing with a Ouija board, which attracted the demons. There was also a black visible apparition, an entity which terrorized the family, going from room to room. Ed said he saw rocks apporting in the midair below the ceiling, which would then fall from the ceiling. And the girls routinely levitated and floated in the air, crisscrossing each other while they were floating. We've all seen the photograph of Janet, apparently, in my opinion, jumping out of her bed at the moment the camera snapped. But Ed says, nope, they were floating to and fro throughout the room. Now, interestingly, Janet and Margaret Hodgson today claim that what the Warrens say is true. They appeared in multiple publicity shots and get-togethers for the movie The Conjuring 2 with Lorraine. The 2 girls appeared on a documentary bonus feature on the Blu-ray and DVD, where they're talking about how Lorraine helped save them, Ed helped save them, and that they were the only 2 people who really tried to help the family and understood that they were under demonic attack. I don't recall them ever telling Guy or Morris that they were under demonic attack. But I wasn't there. Snedeker case, another case. This was a case where a family rented a house or bought a house, one or the other, moved into it, and apparently were not aware that the house used to be a funeral home. Well, remember what the Warren said about funeral homes. They're often infested by demons because there were lots of dead people there to attract them. The family experienced allegedly a plethora of demonic haunting and poltergeist activity. It was written about in a book called In a Dark Place by Ed and Lorraine Warren with Ray Garton. Ray Garton wrote the book in its entirety. Ed and Lorraine Warren just provided them with the idea. They wrote none of the book. It was also the subject of a TV documentary on the Discovery Channel called A Haunting in Connecticut, and was the subject of the motion picture The Haunting in Connecticut. There's a newspaper photo of the Snedeker family, and there's Ed and Lorraine in the background. So they really were there. And it's a true story. It says it right on the cover of the book, the story of a true haunting. All righty then. Well, that's Ray Garton. Ray is the guy who actually wrote the book. Ray has been very vocal about what really happened with this book. And I've chatted with Ray. And Ray has told other people, including me, that this is all absolute nonsense. That Ed Warren approached him, said, here's his family. Here's some of the stuff they claim they've experienced. And I want you to write a book that will scare the crap out of people. So Ray was contracted to write the book. Ray said, okay, I need more information than this. And some of these notes you've given me are contradictory. You know, what about this? They say this on this day, but on this day, they say this different thing. Ray says Ed told him, forget about it. Don't worry about it. It's nonsense. These people are crazy anyway. Just take what I've given you, make up the rest, but make it as scary as hell. This is according to the guy who wrote the book. And it's not just Ray Garton. Another one of the Warrens' books called The Demonologist by Gerald Ritter. It says right on the cover of the book, the true story of Ed and Lorraine Warren, the world famous exorcism thing. The true story. Well, yeah, okay. From the preface of the book, and I quote from Gerald Riddle, all of the information presented in this book is true. These are real cases that happen to real people. It should be stressed that there is no exaggeration, no hyperbole in the presentation of the phenomena in this book. Okay. Until the movie franchise, The Conjuring, came out and started making millions and millions, now I think into the billion-dollar range with the sequels, based on some of the material that Brittle wrote about in his book, The Demonologist. He sued Warner Brothers, said, hey, this was stolen from me. These are my stories. All of this is my intellectual property. Warner Brothers countered, no. You said this is a true story. These are true events that happen to real people, and they're historical events. That cannot be copyrighted. History cannot be copyrighted. If it happened, then anybody can write about it or make a movie about it. Brittle countered by saying, well, no, this is not real. This is a fictional novel that I was hired to write, by the Warrens. I made this stuff up. These are fictional stories. That's my intellectual property. It's my stories. Again, the guy who wrote the book now says it is all made up. When I was talking with Ray Garton, chatting with Ray Garton, he indicated there's another author who ghost wrote one of the Warrens' books, who had the same experience that they were told, make it up, just make it scary so people will buy the book. I don't want to identify that author yet because I have not spoken with him yet. Ray's going to try to connect us so I can interview him. But if I get more information on that, I will follow up on it within the ASSAP forum. Maybe I'll write an article for the newsletter or journal at some point as I get more information. Not just demons and ghosts. As you know, the Warrens fought Bigfoot. April 1976 in rural Tennessee. This is a little known case. It's not in a lot of their materials. Bigfoot was tormenting a small community in rural Tennessee. Now remember 1976. There's a reason why that year is important. Ed talked to the sheriff. The sheriff told Ed that Bigfoot is real. He's seen it himself. It's tormenting his people in the community. And the sheriff even started wearing a gun for the first time in his career because he was so afraid, which is interesting to me. Sheriffs are not sheriffs in the US. Sheriffs are not sheriffs of small communities. Sheriffs are sheriffs of counties, which are large political subdivisions with towns and cities within them. I've been in law enforcement my entire life. Other than Sheriff Andy Taylor on the Andy Griffith Show, I've never heard of a sheriff who did not carry a gun and needed Bigfoot to scare him into doing it. In the writing about that the Warrens did, on some pages, this guy was the sheriff. On other days, he was identified as a security guard who worked at a local department store. I think it's got to be one or the other because I've never heard of a sheriff of a county who also worked as a security guard at a department store. But he needed the Warrens to get to the bottom of this. So while Ed's talking to the sheriff, Lorraine wanders out deep into the woods to find Bigfoot. And she found Bigfoot. Did not physically see him because Bigfoot was scared and Bigfoot hid behind some trees and would not approach Lorraine. But Lorraine made psychic contact with him. And quoting Lorraine, his eyes were dark, intelligent, and trusting. This creature had the ability to communicate thoughts. It doesn't mean to harm anyone and is more apt to seek out compassion and acceptance than to try to hurt or harm anyone. It finds it easier to reach out to children. Unquote. 1976 was the year in the United States when the Bigfoot craze started. Just like 1973 was a year when another craze started in the US, and we'll discuss that in a moment. But Bigfoot was all the news. CB radios and Bigfoot was the big deal 1976 in the US. And that's when, of course, Lorraine and Ed happened to encounter Bigfoot. 1973, that's when the Warrens started focusing big time on demons as opposed to ghosts. What happened culturally in the US and the world, which might have some connection with that change of emphasis, might have been the publication of The Exorcist in 1971, and then the hit blockbuster movie in 1973. Don't know. 1973, October 26, a magazine article written by Betty Burr about Ed Warren, because she went to Ed Warren to say, what's the down low on this Exorcist case? We hear rumors that it was based on a real case. Ed told her that he is one of the very few people on the planet who are given secret access to the confidential church files on the real case. He's reviewed it. It's absolutely true. And Ed told her some of the story. And the story that Ed told her is the same material we've seen in the various books about the real case in Maryland in 1948, I think. The material was also published in the newspapers at the time, but Ed got it from the secret church or maybe secret Vatican files. Interestingly, she says she went to Ed's house to get the information on what the confidential files contain. Well, if the files were confidential and the church trusted Ed to be privy to them, seems a bit of a ethics conflict for Ed to brief the reporter on it. And Ed also, in his own words, in the Demonologist, said he is one of the few people who examined the official records of the Exorcist case. Okay, maybe, for a self-appointed demonologist. Now, I've talked about these cases, famous publicized cases, where a lot of it we think is nonsense, that these were cases where there was fraud, stuff was made up. At least the stories, the books, in a couple of cases, more than a couple of cases, the people who wrote the book say it was made up. There was one case, though, that the Warrens were at, which I and many other people believe was a legitimate hardcore poltergeist case. Lindley Street, Bridgeport, Connecticut, late 1974 into 75. Poltergeist activity witnessed by multiple witnesses. Police officers who responded and saw levitation, saw things moving. Fire department people came. Reporters saw things happening. There were parapsychologists on site. Boyce Beatty, who was with the representing the ASPR at the time. Keith Harari from the PRF in Durham, and Jerry Solfin again from the PRF were there. They saw things occurring to various degrees. Ed Warren was there, looking at things from his demonic approach. Ed saw some of these things too, while these other people, in some cases, were standing right next to him. So I think Ed, in this case, was at a legitimately haunted or poltergeist-infested house and saw real material. occurring. And I think that boils down to the fact that no matter what kind of demonologist or movie usher or fake author you are, you attend enough allegedly haunted locations over enough years, eventually you're going to find yourself at ground zero, at the right place at the right time. I think that might have been the case here. Boyce Beatty, who was the lead investigator, wrote in a parapsychology journal, I believe, that this was RSPK. This was a poltergeist activity going on. There was an identified poltergeist agent who was definitely the focus and met the dynamics perfectly for being a classic Bill Roll type RSPK agent. The case has been written up in several parapsychology journals and books, the best of which is The World's Most Haunted House by William Hall. If you have an interest in poltergeists, get this book. It is one of the best documented, best written, with tons of witness statements, evidence. I put this book up there with This House is Haunted. And another excellent poltergeist book is about the Malcolm Robinson, about the Sawkey poltergeist in Scotland, another incredibly well documented and tested case. This one is up there. I personally think Lindley Street is the most well documented poltergeist case in history. Objects seen by multiple witnesses. Marcia, a little 10-year-old girl who was the poltergeist focus, was sitting in a heavy recliner. While she was sitting in the recliner, Ed and other credible witnesses saw the recliner lift off the ground and hover for a moment with Marcia in it. Light bulbs exploded, objects flew across the room, hitting people and hurting them. A couple of broken toes, I believe, in one case. A table moved across the floor, off the ground, witnessed by Ed, while two news reporters were standing right next to him. The news reporters reported their observation. Furniture, instantaneous rearrangement and relocation. Again, classic poltergeist phenomena. Multiple people, including Ed, Paul Eno, one of their investigators, and police officers, witnessed a refrigerator lift off the ground by a couple of inches and glide horizontally off the ground 6 to 8 feet before gently setting back down. This appears to me to be an authentic case, and Ed was there in the middle of it. So kudos to Ed for having a real case he was on. But there's a seminary student who was there on the scene, who was working with the Warrens, Paul Eno. Paul Eno has gone on to become an author and a prolific paranormal investigator on his own accord, and Paul does not believe in demons anymore. But Paul was standing talking to Ed and Lorraine, and Paul noticed a red mark forming on Lorraine's hand. And while he was watching it, the red mark got redder and redder and started blistering and turned to a second-degree burn. Ed went into a panic. Ed was afraid this was spontaneous human combustion starting up due to demonic instigation, and was afraid Lorraine was going to burst into flames. So they gave Lorraine whatever medical treatment she needed, and Lorraine did not burst into flames. But the suspected poltergeist agent, 10-year-old Marcia, told the police that she saw Lorraine holding her hand under a stream of running hot water immediately before Eno noticed the burn mark on the hand. Now, the Warrens were then ejected from the case and then received a cease and desist order from the family's lawyer demanding that they not use the family's name or details in any lectures or books the Warrens were giving. And they received a bill for their outrageously expensive long distance phone bill, all caused by Ed making phone calls from the house to around the country, calling different media outlets, book publishers, and TV networks, trying to get publicity for the case. So Ed was there, but Ed was still being Ed. Some of their NESPER investigators that have worked with the Warrens have over the years taken a step back from their endorsements and belief in the Warrens. Paul Eno, who was a seminary student at the time, worked with the Warrens. In his book, a recent book, a very good book called Dancing Past the Graveyard, talking about the Warrens, and I quote, "While the Warrens considered themselves ultra-conservative Roman Catholics, actual theology was not their forte. In fact, they had little academic background in anything. Many of their practices were questionable," unquote. I've spoken with one of their former lead investigators, Brian McIntyre, who was the NESPER's lead investigator on cases from the late 1990s to the early 2000s. This is the period when Ed was seriously ill and was not able to be a lead. So Brian McIntyre, working with John Zaffis, took the lead on a lot of these cases. Brian is now a Eastern Orthodox priest. He's now known as Father Maximus McIntyre. We talk occasionally. I think he is authentic. I think he believes in demons. He looks at things from a religious perspective. He also believes that the Warrens' theology and what they said about, you can be a Wiccan or you can be a voodoo priest and you can fight demons. Father Maximus finds that very theologically questionable. And he also feels today that the Warrens were much too quick to jump on everything as being demonic. Cases of ghosts, cases of RSPK, cases of EVP, things that we in this group would consider to be run-of-the-mill parapsychological or psi phenomena. Everything to Ed and Lorraine was a demon. Other former Warren investigators have said the same thing. This was I found on an online chat group from Walt. Walt is indicating he was also one of their lead investigators in the late 90s and saw little evidence that the Warrens claimed they were gathering, other than lots of orb photographs. He felt that the Warrens were just promoting their brand and had no problem with just showing scary stuff. I've not been able to identify who Walt is, so take this for what it's worth. It's just a random posting on a chat site. It may or may not be legitimate. I just thought it was interesting. Let's talk about some scandal. This is not my information. This is information I am taking directly from mainstream media sources. This is an article in the Hollywood Reporter magazine discussing the lawsuits against Warner Brothers by Gerald Brittle, but also discussing claims made by a woman named Judith Penny. According to Judith Penny, she was a 15-year-old schoolgirl. Ed Warren was the bus driver who drove her to school every day. When she was 15, according to her claims, she began a romantic relationship with 30-something-year-old Ed Warren. Penny moved into the Warrens' house in 1963, and that's a documented fact. And began continued a 40-year relationship with Ed in the Warrens' house with the full knowledge and acceptance by Lorraine Warren. She lived in the house until 2003. May 1978, Penny claimed she became pregnant with Ed's child. And Lorraine talked her into getting an abortion and keeping her mouth shut, because if the news got out, it would destroy the Warrens' reputation and their franchise. There's this story also from Fox News. So this is not me. This is reported news stories. Makes you think about Ed's claim to be a pious, ultra-religious Catholic who did God's work, saving mankind from evil forces. One of the cases that Ed claimed that he investigated was a ghost in Union Cemetery near Monroe, or I think it was in Monroe. There was the White Lady of Monroe Cemetery, who was a white lady ghost who wandered in amongst the gravestones. Ed showed me a video clip that he said was the White Lady. And it's one of the pieces of evidence that he touted as being absolute proof of the existence of the paranormal. Well, Miss Penny claimed that she was the White Lady of Union Cemetery. Ed had her dress up in a white flowing gown and filmed her out of focus walking amongst the gravestones, and that she was the White Lady in this evidence. And more from Fox News. Penny claimed that when she was living in the Warrens' household, Ed would beat Lorraine. Quoting her from Fox News, sometimes Ed would have to slap her across the face to shut her up. Well, that Ed was abusive to Lorraine. Some nights I thought they were going to kill each other. Has nothing to do with paranormal investigations, except for the White Lady impersonation, but it goes a lot to who the Warrens were and what their legacy will be. And that's Penny in the photograph standing next to Ed. Well, Ed and Lorraine claimed they had decades of evidence and what they called proof, absolute undeniable proof of the existence of the paranormal. This evidence was never released to any other investigator or to ASSAP or the SPR or to the Ryan Center. None of it was ever peer reviewed. The Warrens maintained it in their house, in their archives, but you could see it if you paid a fee and went to one of their lectures or a special event at their house. Well, I got to see some of this incredible, undeniable evidence. I had talked to Ed on the phone and said, hey, I'd like to come out interview you for a possible article I'm going to write. And I'd like to see some of the evidence you're always talking about. I said, yep, come on up, no problem. So I visited him. It was in 1996. And then later on, I went to one of their lecture events and presentations where some more evidence was shown to a larger group session. That's their house. Their museum is in the back. It's an attached building, partially underground, accessible through a tunnel that leads from the house. Well, some of the proof that I was able to see, courtesy of Ed and Lorraine, a lot of still photographs of alleged ghosts and paranormal activity. Not photographs that the Warrens took, not photographs from the Warrens' cases. These are the photographs we've all seen in hundreds of books over the decades. The Brown Lady of Raynham Hall photograph, I think it's the Greenwich stairs photograph of the ghost walking up the spiral staircase. There's a famous photograph of what looked like a woman sitting in the back seat of a car. There's the Lord Crombermere photograph showing a see-through apparition sitting in a chair. These are the photographs Ed presented as absolute proof he had of the paranormal. Well, these photographs largely have been discredited, or at the very least, are highly questionable. That's Ed's proof. The photographs from his own investigations that he showed me consisted of a lot of photographs of dust, excuse me, I mean orbs, and camera, excuse me, I mean vortexes, and a fuzzy, indecipherable video of a figure, Penny, walking behind some gravestones. It also showed me evidence of demonic possession, where a werewolf, not just Bigfoot they dealt with, but a werewolf was exorcised by them. And audio recordings of Fred, grunting a lot. That was his undeniable proof that he charged people money to go look at. These photographs are not ones I took while I was there. These are photographs I found on the web showing the artifact room and the collection of these evil demonic items that Ed had to remove from houses, perform binding rituals on them so they would not attack humanity. What this room is full of are Halloween masks, gargoyle bookends, spooky signs, tons of Halloween home decorations and a couple of actual spooky looking things. The one thing that I saw, which I actually was interested in, and he actually allowed me to handle, was he claimed to have some wreckage from from the crash of Eastern Flight 401, the Don Repo the haunting case. He had some shards of fiberglass that he claimed were from the crash. I have no way of knowing if that's true or not, but it's interesting. I've always been fascinated by that case, and so maybe I actually got to handle some wreckage from Flight 401. He has several demonic dolls. I don't know if this is one of the ones that ran the Navy commander off the road or not. Again, Halloween masks, copies of their own books, plastic skulls, the horrifying cursed pearls of death. Werewolf exorcisms. I saw a video of the exorcism. This is Paul McKenna. This is Bill Ramsey. Bill Ramsey was from the UK, in and out of psychiatric institutes, had some issues. He attacked people. He went into a police station and started attacking the police there. Ed met him when he was visiting the UK, determined, well, Bill, you're possessed by a demon. And it's a demon that takes on a wolf persona. And Bill thought he became a wolf. Bill said he transformed into a wolf physically. Well, under observation, Ed noticed, well, no, you're not really transforming into a wolf. It's to the human eye, but you are spiritually. During the exorcism by, this is Reverend Paul McKenna, again, or Bill McKenna, the video shows this activity, and Ed said the contortions and the claw-like movements Bill Ramsey made with his hands were beyond what a human being could possibly do. That Bill's face contorted into what looked like a wolf, supernaturally. A wolf's face would superimpose over it. The claws were animal claws. There was no way on earth that human hands could possibly assume that shape. I watched the video. This is a still from the video. That's the facial expression. Those are the clawing motions that Bill Ramsey made during the exorcism. Nothing more than that. To Ed, that is physically impossible for a human to do, and is prima facie evidence of demonic possession. One of the I didn't get my own photo apparently, so I stole this from the web. But one of Ed's prized possessions is a copy of the Necronomicon, which Ed told me was a horrendously evil and foul, real, authentic manual with spells and methods to summon demons and interact with the evil dark ones, the old ones. Apparently no one ever told Ed that Necronomicon was a fictional MacGuffin invented by H.P. Lovecraft as a background story item for several of his short stories. There never was a Necronomicon. It is not real. There have been books published from the 1980s into the 1990s, including some very nice ones with leather bindings, which call themselves the Necronomicon, which were done by H.P. Lovecraft fans to try to create some physical object honoring, the H.P. Lovecraft mythology and concept of the Necronomicon, ancient book of mystical spells. Ed thought it was stone cold real, and Ed thought he had him one. I couldn't touch it because I would become possessed. These are some of my photos that I took when I was there. Again, lots of Halloween masks, multiple warnings, do not touch. I forget what this object on the right was, but it, as a visual item, it's legitimately spooky. On the left, this was an item that he said he found in the woods at a place where there was evidence of ritual satanic ceremonial activity. And this is a devil totem that he recovered. It looks kind of spooky. And here's Annabelle. Positively do not touch, yep, except when you bring it out to Zach Bagan's house. The Journal of the NSPR, Learned Professional Journal of Paranormal Phenomena. Well, I subscribed for a couple of years, just to see for myself, because Ed wanted me to join NESPER. Ed wanted me to join the group, and Ed was going to bring me out on some site investigations with him so you could see what he did, so I could see what he did and see the reality of the demonic. So he's like, yeah, Randy, you come with us. We're going to do this. Join NESPER so you can be an official member and tag along with us. And you can write about it. That's fine. Lorraine looked at him and said, Ed, maybe you should slow down a bit. Maybe we should get to know Randy better before we bring him out on one of our cases. Ed goes, no, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Lorraine glared at him and said, no, we'll talk about this later, Ed. I never did go out on an investigation with them. But I did join and got their journal, which looks like something done for a junior high school audience. And just make your own opinion on the veracity of the learned journal of NESPER with questions and answers. Lorraine, as a psychic, are you good at guessing numbers? All righty then. There's some of their evidence, again, from the pages of the journal. Left, demonic orbs. The right, demonic vortices. And in the center, one of the rarest phenomena ever captured. A vortex, and an orb captured at the same time at a demonic infestation case. Okay, alrighty then. Ed went into a coma March 26, 2001. He had heart failure, was in serious condition. He did eventually came out of the coma, but he never recovered. He was invalid, was in and out of inpatient and outpatient rehab, and died at home, I believe, August 23rd, 2006, age 76. Lorraine died, age 92, April 18th, 2019. The end of an era. Well, make what you will of the Warrens. I started out actually being open-minded and thinking, okay, I'm not going to trash them just because they believe in the existence of possible demonic forces. I've never encountered such a thing. I'm open-minded, and I do believe there are some cases which do, outlier cases, rather rare, but they do take on that persona. And there are various reasons that could explain that without having to bring in real demonic activity. As my research on the Warrens progressed and I read more and more, then talked to them, talked to other people, I think you can tell that my opinion has progressed and I have a definite opinion today. They do have a legacy. What is that legacy? I'm going to let this photograph speak for itself. God, I love it.